Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 2 of our reading of A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent. And this is a book by Marie Brennan. In the last episode, or the last one was the first one, we were introduced to Lady Trent, and it focused mainly on her young childhood. And her fascination with wings and dragons and things of that nature. We are now going to go over the copyright information. I don't know why my phone is wanting to ding like that. So we're going to this page is there. As you can clearly see, it says copyright 2013 by Brennan Neuenschwander. All rights reserved. Anyways, we are going to pick up where we left off, and I forget where we left off, so we're just going to start at the beginning of chapter 2 and go from there. 2. The chapters are blackmail, reckless stupidity, and even more unfortunate incident with a wolf drake, the near loss of off-the-shoulder dresses. We knew disgracefully little of dragons in those days, as there were no true dragons in Scotland, and the field of natural history was only beginning to turn its attention abroad. I was very conversant, though, with the available information on those lesser cousins of dragons which may still be found in our own lands, and no command nor sum of money could have persuaded me to pass up an opportunity to learn more firsthand. So when word came that a wolf drake had been sighted on our property not one but several times by several different witnesses, and that it had been savaging sheep, you may well imagine how my interest soared. The name, of course, is a fanciful one. There is nothing wolf-like about them, save their tendency to view livestock as their rightful meal. They are scarce in Scotland now, and were not abundant then. No one had sighted one in our region for a generation. Please hold just a sec. Anyways, how could I forego the chance? First, however, I had to contrive a way to see the beast. Papa immediately set about organizing a hunt, just as he would have for a wolf that made a nuisance of itself. Had I asked for permission to ride along, though, as Andrew did, without success, I would absolutely have been denied. I had enough sense to realize that riding out on my own in hopes of sighting the wolf drake would be fruitless and highly dangerous. Highly dangerous if it were not. Gaining my desire, therefore, would require more serious effort. Credit or perhaps blame for what followed belongs at least in part to one Amanda Lewis, whose family were our nearest neighbors during my youth. My father and Mr. Lewis were good friends, but the same could not be said of my mother and Mrs. Lewis, and this created a degree of tension whenever social occasions threw us together, especially given Mama's disapproval of their daughter. Amanda was 1 year my senior and the only girl of near age and equal status anywhere in the Tam River Valley. To my mother's unending distress, she was also what young people nowadays would call wing, very improper in what Amanda thought to be fashionable ways. I had never been wing. My impropriety had always been decidedly unfashionable, but as I had no one else with whom to socialize, Mama could hardly forbid me to visit the Lewises, and so Amanda was my closest friend until marriage took us both away. On the day we learned of the wolf drake, I walked 2 miles to her house to share the news, and my situation immediately fired her fruitful imagination. Clutching a book to her chest, Amanda drew in a delighted breath and said, eyes sparkling with mischief, "Oh, but it is easy. You must dress yourself as a boy and ride with them. Lest I be thought that I slander the name of my childhood friend by laying this incident at her feet, I must assure you that I, nor she, was the one who found a way to put her idea into practice. This has often been the way we met. This has often been the way with me. Notions too mad for another to take seriously are the very notions I seize upon and enact, often in the most organized and sensible fashion. I say this not out of pride, but for it was very stupid, for a very stupid habit that has nearly gotten me killed more than once. But out of honesty, if you do not understand what my husband has called my deranged practicality, very little of my life will make the slightest bit of sense. So, Amanda's declaration was the spark, the tinder, the kindling, which built it into a blaze and the kindling which built it into a blaze were entirely my doing, and went thusly. There were a number of lads who did odd jobs around the estate, mostly out of doors. I was not generally on close terms with these, but there was one, Jim, over whom I had a hold. Specifically, I had once come upon him in highly compromising circumstances with one of our downstairs maids. I myself had been on my way to hide a small and fascinating skull I could not identify, but I had it concealed in my skirts. Jim did not know my own compromising circumstances. He therefore owed me a favor, and I determined that now was the time to redeem it. Bringing me along on the hunt was, of course, an offense for which he could be turned out with no references. I could have achieved the same by telling of his dalliances with the maid, and while I would not have done so, I led him to believe I would. You may think it dreadful of me, and I blush now to recall my blackmail, but I will not pretend I had such scruples then. Jim, I insisted, must bring me on the hunt. Here, the chilly distance between my mother and Mrs. Lewis served my purposes very well. Amanda told Mama that she had invited me to her house for an afternoon and evening, to be returned on the morrow, and Mama, little desirous of corresponding with her neighbor, gave permission without asking questions. Therefore, on the morning the hunt was to begin, Amanda stopped by our estate with a manservant on the pretense that I would be spending a few days with her family. A small distance down the road, we reined in, and I inclined my head at her for my saddle, which her manservant looked on, mystified. "Thank you, Amanda." Her eyes fairly danced. "You must tell me all about it when it's over." "Certainly," I replied, though I knew she would probably grow tired of the story in short order unless I contrived to have a thrilling romance while on the hunt. Amanda's taste in reading ran to sensational novels, not natural history. I left her to deal with the manservant by whatever means she found appropriate, and rode by back ways to the field where the hunt was gathering. Jim was waiting for me by a sheltered spring, and as we had arranged. "I've told them you're my cousin here for a visit," he said, handing over a sack of clothes. "It's a madhouse down there. People in from all over. No one will think it strange if you join us." "I'll be just a moment," I told him, and shifted to a spot where he could not see me, casting a look over my shoulder all the time in case he should have followed me. I changed out of my own riding habit and into the much rougher boy's clothing he had brought me. Words cannot express, I might add, how alien it was to wear trousers for the first time. I felt half naked. I had worn them on many occasions since, trousers being far more practical for dragon chasing than skirts, but it took me many years to adjust. To his credit, Jim blushed when he saw me dressed so scandalously. He was a good lad, but he helped me bundle my hair up under a cap, and with it hidden, I believe I made a passable boy. I was not done growing then, and was all coltish arms and legs, with not much to speak of yet in the way of hips or breasts. And why is it, I ask you, that my editors should complain to me of such words, when I have written several books discussing dragon anatomy and reproduction in far more frank terms? He will not wish to leave this aside I predict, but I shall make him. There are advantages to my age and status. Let me make a series. Okay. The most startling part of the morning, though, came with when Jim handed me a gun. He saw the look on my face and said, "You don't know how to use one, do you?" "Why should I?" was my reply, and said it in a rather sharper tone than he deserved. After all, I was the one who had insisted on dressing in boys' clothes. It was hardly fit that I should act the offended lady now. He took it in stride. "Well, it's pretty simple. You put the stock up against your shoulder, pointing in the direction." His voice trailed off. I suspect he, like I, was imagining the potential consequences of me actually firing a gun in the midst of a chaotic hunt. "Let's just leave it unloaded, shall we?" I asked, and he said, "Yes, let's." Which was how I came to ride in the hunt for the wolf drake. Disguised as a boy, my hair under a cap, and an unloaded rifle in my hand, on my mare Bossy, who had been rubbed all over with dust to conceal her glossy coat. Jim was right to call it a madhouse. Despite Papa's best effort, it was a disorganized thing, with far too many people there. Few men wanted to miss their chance to hunt a wolf drake. The day was quite fine, and I could barely contain my excitement as we rode. The areas in which the wolf drake had been sighted were not terribly far from our manor house, which was why Papa had moved so quickly to organize the hunt, but we still had some distance to go. Our estate consisted mostly of rocky hills, soil suitable more for sheep than anything else, though we had some tenant farmers in the Tam River Valley. The manor house stood just on the north edge of that valley. If one were to ride east or west, the terrain was gentler, but our path led us north, where the land sloped up quickly into an area too steep to be worth clearing. Their pine trees still ruled, and in their shade the wolf drake was said to be hiding. I stuck to Jim's side like a burr, and affected to be shy, so as not to have to answer any more questions than necessary. I did not trust my voice to pass, even though I was clearly supposed to be a beardless boy. Jim served me well in this regard, talking enough that no one else should get a word in edgewise, though perhaps his nerves were the ones talking. He had reason enough to be worried. We reached the northern woods in a short time after noon, at which point the leaders began to organize the hunt. "Quick, head for Simpkin," I said, urging Jim away from my father and other men who might know me. I gathered from the fragments of speech I overheard that the preparations for the hunt had begun. Well in advance of today, we congregated some distance downwind of the copse of trees that gave off an undeniable stink of carrion. It seemed that Papa's huntsman had been placing carcasses there for several days to lure the wolf drake to a predetermined spot. Some brave souls had ventured forth that morning to examine the copse and found signs that the creature lay within. What followed was quite a confusing tangle to me, knowing nothing as I did of hunting. Men held wolfhounds and mastiffs on leashes, each dog muzzled so it would not bark and give our presence away. They seemed very uneasy to me. Dogs that will hunt wolves without fear may still bark at approaching any sort of dragon kind. Nonetheless, their handlers chived and cuffed them to prearranged positions, through which I understood the wolf drake was to be driven. An arc of local men was set out with unlit torches at a great distance from the wood. When the time came, they were to light their brands and approach the creature's shelter, provoking it to fight. No, flight, sorry. Provoking it to flight. Let me see. This, at least, was the intention. Wolf drakes are cunning beasts. No one could be certain that it would oblige us by fleeing into our trap. Thus, the arrangement of riders, myself and Jim included, at other points in the area. If the creature bolted, we would have to chase it down. Astute readers will correctly surmise that I would not have troubled to mention the last point had the hunt gone according to plan. My first sight of the wolf drake came as a furious blur of movement streaking out of the wood. I do not know what precisely the hounds had been intended to do at that moment, but they never had a chance to do it. The drake was upon them too quickly. Rare as the species was, the hunters had underestimated reports of its speed. The creature leapt upon one of the mastiffs, and there was an abrupt, shocking spray of blood. The other dogs hesitated before rushing into the fight, and their delay undid all our careful plans. The lines of the hunt were broken, and now we gave chase. I've always been a good rider, for in those days it was not uncommon for the daughters of country gentry to learn to sit a horse both side saddle and astride. Never in my rambles with Bossy around my family's estate, however, had I experienced anything like this. Jim goaded his horse forward, and mine followed by instinct, wanting, as horses do, not to be left alone. So we were galloping across the rocky slope at a pace far faster than Mama would have deemed safe. The wolf drake was a distant figure, already well ahead, and only the quick thinking of some of the local men kept it from escaping us entirely. They blocked its path with fire and sent it veering southwest again, whereupon we angled across to intercept it. The dogs were running as if to avenge the death of their brother. The wolfhounds leading far in the front, they harried the wolf drake back and forth, while hunting horns gave their cries and directed the group of horsemen about. All too soon, however, we reached another patch of the woodlands, and I understood why they had initially chosen the isolated copse in which to lay their bait. Once in the main stretch of woods, finding and trapping the drake would be much more difficult. Despite the best efforts of the hunters and hounds, the creature reached the shelter of the woods. One of Papa's huntsmen, a fellow as stony-faced as the hills around us, spat onto the ground, and it reminded me that he did not know he was in the presence of a lady. "Won't run so fast now," he said, eyeing the shadows into which it had vanished, "but we'll have a devil of a time digging it out." This afforded us our first chance to catch our breath since the chase had begun. Some of the men had brief, incomprehensible conversations, out of which the only information I could sift was that we were now to use certain techniques common to boar hunting. Since I knew no more of this than I did of wolf hunting, the change did not mean much to me, but the mastiffs were brought up and the wolfhounds called back. The situation called now for strength more than speed. The pines in this area were old and tall enough that we could often ride beneath their branches without ducking, and the carpet of their needles meant the ground was startlingly bare, except where a tree had fallen and created a gap in which other plants might grow. I soon lost sight of much of the hunt, but Jim stayed with me and the rest of our group to either side. Through the trees we heard occasional shouts and blares of the horns telling us nothing had been sighted yet. In the frenzy of barking, then nothing. Then a frenzy of barking, then nothing. We paused where we were, as much to consider our path as anything else, for a tangle of underbrush blotted the ground in front of us. I looked at Jim, and he back at me. "I should take you home, miss," he said, in a voice too low for others to hear, though no one was nearby. "This really isn't safe anymore." For the first time I felt like agreeing. My entire purpose in coming here had been to see the drake alive and at first hand, rather than as a dead trophy. But I understood now how unlikely that was. The blurred frenzy that savaged one of the dogs might well be the best glimpse I got all day. As I pondered this, Jim suddenly shouted and drove his horse straight at me. Bossy reared up and shrieked, a dreadful sound, and then launched over sideways, spilling me from the saddle. She missed falling on my leg by a hairbreadth. I scrambled to a sitting position on the dry needles, my breath knocked out of me, and Jim half whimpering, half groaning in a way I had never heard before. What drew my attention, though, was a long rumbling snarl. In lands where wolf drakes are still numerous, it is common knowledge that they prefer female prey. Unfortunately, this was a detail we had forgotten, and which Sir Richard Edgeworth had not included in his otherwise splendid book. I looked across at the wolf drake crouching atop a large outcropping of stone. Its scaled hide was a dull brown and fitted in well with our surroundings, and its eyes a disturbing crimson. The low-slung body featured powerful legs ending in scythe-like claws and a long, flexible tail that moved hypnotically back and forth like a cat's. Just behind its shoulders, a pair of vestigial wings shifted and settled. I was not looking away from it. My right hand groped blindly in the needles for the gun I had dropped, but did not find it. Panic built in my throat. The wolf drake's claws tightened on the stone. I fumbled with my left hand, reaching out and further out. Okay, and then there's a picture of the wolf drake. What page is this? And there, my fingers wrapped around the stock of a gun. I dragged it towards me, raising it as I had seen the men do, and the wolf drake tensed, and as I brought the rifle up, it leaped towards me, and only as my finger tightened on the trigger did I remember. We had not loaded my gun. A deafening bang went off in my ear, and the wolf drake landed just to the side of me, claws shearing through shirt and shoulder like knives through butter. I screamed and rolled away, dropping the gun again. The gun that must have been Jim's because it certainly had been loaded. What happened to Jim? The wolf drake was pivoting to face me again, its bulk more agile than it looked, and though there was blood on its hide now, I had struck a glancing blow. It was far from defeated. Here I shall write something heroic, but in truth the thought that went through my head was, this is what you came for, and this is the last thing you will ever see. More gunshots went off. These not directly in my ear, but still loud enough that I screamed again and curled into a ball, terrified, and the shots would hit me, that the wolf drake would leap again, that one way or another I was going to die. Instead, I heard a frenzy of snarling, a horse's agonizing scream, men shouting, and horns blaring, and then, after a moment or two, a blessed sound I recognized, for it was the same horn call they used when returning home from a successful hunt. Pray down. Then there were men around me, and I uncurled only to realize that my cap had fallen off at some point, and in the struggle, and my hair had come loose from the ribbons that had bound it atop my head. There seemed to be brown stains everywhere, waving like banners, as if to advertise, "Here, look, a girl," which was more or less what I heard the men saying, but with rather more profanity. Anyways, more shouts, and then my father was there, staring down at me in horror, the minor pagan god, appalled at what his worshipper had done. I stared back at him. I think this is the point at which things became somewhat muzzy, for I know I went into shock. Papa picked me up and asked about Jim, but no one answered me. Soon I was on Papa's horse, still cradled in his arms, riding out of the woods and across the rocky hillside to a shepherd's cottage. A physician had accompanied the hunt to minister to both the dogs and the men. He arrived shortly after we did. I was not his first patient, though. I heard Jim's voice moaning from the other side of the small room, but I could not see him through the press of other people. "Don't hurt him," I said to no one in particular, though rationally I knew the physician was trying to help him. "Don't blame him. I made him do it, and he protected me. He got in the way when the wolf drake attacked." This I had pieced together after the fact. We're going to stop this here. We've been reading A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent. It is a book by Marie Brennan. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.